Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today's topic is going to be about housing prices and how this affects people directly. Now it's going to be predominantly about the UK housing market, but this first article is from Zero Hedge titled Housing Bubble 2.0, Are You Ready for This? And it's a Case-Shiller report. I'm just going to briefly show you what's been reported via his research. And he breaks it down into all the different areas like Atlanta, Boston, Dallas, Denver. I think that's North Carolina. I'm not sure, someone can correct me on that. Portland, San Francisco, and Seattle. Now, what it is obviously showing us, you can tell immediately, is prices have retraced in the States back to the peak of 06, 07, just before the financial crash. And some have actually even exceeded those levels. So what I'll go into reading now is the UK markets and what's happening over here. So this is also from Zero Hedge on the 15th of July, which was Friday. UK luxury property sales collapse post-Brexit. So as I'm sure the situation is the same in America, the people of the UK are totally brainwashed into the housing property markets because of the decade highs it has generated and the huge expanse of wealth that has been generated on anybody that is fortunate enough to have got in at the right times, like the 1970s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, kind of buying around the high peak periods, and that has only just retraced now. I believe a lot of this boom came from the Margaret Thatcher period of people used to live in government homes, and she introduced the ability for people to own their own homes, which gives people that sense of belonging, ownership, drive to better yourself and enjoy that dream of climbing that property ladder to attain nicer and nicer homes in a material sense. You can walk down the local high street anywhere in the UK and people will normally walk past most of the shops, maybe have a glance in, pop into the local one to buy some bread, some milk, but every estate agent's windows, which in America is called real estate, we call it estate agents, people stop and people look and compare prices because they want to see how they're doing in the market and if there's any houses kind of nearby and how it's basically comparing. Now, the general market direction in housing prices for the past 30 to 40 years has been on a constant gain. So people's mentality and belief is prices will always continue to go up. Demand is so high, supply is so small. So people are buying into what they believe is a never-ending bull market, effectively. And if it goes down in a short time, well, it's going to go up in the long term. And this obviously is all relative to fiat currency. And a lot of the markets that are being propped up after the 08 crash are from government schemes, plans, and things to help prop up markets. Just like quantitative easing in the stock markets. They come out with new help to buy schemes. They come out with lower interest rates so people can borrow more money to buy more overinflated house prices. I won't go too far into the actual divide between somebody buying a house back in 1970 compared to today, but effectively people could buy on like a 4 times their yearly wage, whereas now it's more like 7, 8 times your average wage because of the overinflated price of property. Now, back then they had a correction in a market which saw interest rates rise to 17%, I believe, which totally crippled the market. Anyway, let me get back on track with this Zero Hedge article. Things just went to 11 on the spinal tap amplifier of Britain's property market, having detailed the numerous dominoes that have begun to fall and the start of forced real estate liquidations. The hard data from British Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors suggest Britain just got killed by the housing market. And even more critically, as Bloomberg reports, a measure of London luxury home price changes crashed to its weakest since the financial crisis as of the UK's vote to leave the EU sent shockwaves across the nation. Having previously shown the following chart as an example of the liquidity gap between fund level liquidations and the exuberant UK real estate market, warning that things could get very ugly very quickly. So currently the UK property prices are, up until the end of the first quarter of 2016, were on a continued rise. That's like a 3-year rise. UK Property Fund is now obviously had some sideways action in 2015, which has now severely been hit in 2016 and is now on quite a large decline. Bloomberg reports they just did. The index by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors dropped to a minus 46 in June from minus 35 the previous month, showing that more real estate agents are recording lower prices in the capital than higher ones. The reading was the weakest since 2009. All responses were received after the EU referendum on 23rd of June. A separate report from Acadata Limited and LSL Property Services plc showing home values in the capital were already bringing her ahead of the vote, with prices decreasing 1.4% in May, the biggest monthly fall since June 2011. And as you can see here on the chart, it's not just the odd one or two spikes, it's a continued spike. So judging by the beginning of this in 2007-2008, we're at this sort of level here. It doesn't retrace back up, so via chart data and subject to governmental interference, manipulation, however you want to say it, odds are that it's going to continue. RICS survey provides the first insight into the impact the decision to leave the EU is having on the housing market. It shows nationwide demand falling to its lowest levels since the middle of 2008, while the number of properties put up for sale plunged to a record low. A gauge of sales expectations for the next 3 months was at its weakest in 28 years. Quote, "It was always likely we were going to see a bit of a fallout from the EU referendum," end quote, Simon Rubinson, RICS chief economist, said in an interview on Bloomberg television with Guy Johnson and Caroline Hyde. Quote, "It's also part of a trend that emerged at the start of the second quarter, particularly in London data," end quote. The Brexit vote has, quote, "clearly unnerved many buyers and sellers, and it is evident that some are reevaluating what they do and or are attempting to renegotiate the price," end quote, he said. The Evening Standard is a UK publication. London housing market at a complete standstill during Brexit vote. And this is what I was talking about. People love to just stare at windows and prices and other homes, and it's like catching Pokemon. They like to catch houses. The rapidly cooling London property market ground to a complete halt in the run-up to the EU referendum, as has started to slide since last month's shock vote of the Brexit. Fears over the outcome of the poll on the EU membership, combined with the impact of stamp duty hikes on more expensive homes, left the market stagnating on zero growth during the spring quarter, according to the respected Halifax House Price Index. Halifax is a banking firm in the UK, and they have the largest data of house sales over time, compiled in their archives. Chris Williamson, chief economist at financial data company Market, which compiles the index for the Halifax, said, quote, "This is the first time prices have failed to rise in London since late 2012, end quote. He added, quote, "Some of the heat, therefore, seems to have gone out of the housing market. However, the extent to which this is a reflection of Brexit worries or the increase in stamp duty in the budget remains uncertain," end quote. However, a second piece of research, one of the first published since the poll, pointed to a surprise result tipping the London property market into reverse, with asking prices down 1.1% over the past month. It means that the Brexit result has already cost the average London homeowner £6,000, according to the latest asking price index compiled by property search website home.co.uk. The 1.1% monthly fall was the biggest for any region in Britain and leaves average asking prices in London standing at £544,000. Doug Shepherd, director of home.co.uk, said, quote, "It's too early to fully appreciate the Brexit fallout from the UK property market, but the initial indications are certainly worrying," end quote. He added, quote, "Until last month, the property market had been functioning well and was helping to shore up the fragile UK economy. Brexit just knocked one of the wheels off." End quote. The two surveys confirm growing anecdotal evidence from agents that buyers are refusing to pay, quote, "overvalued," end quote, pre-Brexit prices. Any signs that the property market in London is starting to slump will delight the first-time buyers who have struggled to gain toehold on the property ladder since prices began to boom in 2009 after the financial crash, which is nothing more than a financial correction. Research carried out by the Standard last week suggests there has been a surge in the number of sellers cutting the price of their properties over recent weeks. Okay. Property Wire. UK housing market sees market drop in activity, particularly in the south. Now, we have a huge divide in the UK, where the south and the southeast are generally so much more expensive than any other area in the UK. Of course, there's going to be pockets in other areas that are extremely expensive, but as an average across region to region, it's below basically the Midlands of the UK and down, which is, it could be twice the price for the same type of house and more. Friday, 15th July. Uncertainty fueled by the European, so it's the same title, uncertainty, European referendum, blah blah. In June, some 36% more chartered surveyors nationally reported a fall in interest, the lowest reading since the middle of 2008, according to the latest month residential market survey from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. The south of the UK has been the hardest hit, with anecdotal evidence suggesting both the EU result and the tax changes which took effect at the beginning of April as having an impact on sentiment. The report also shows that 45% more chartered surveyors saw a fall in new instructions in June from the net balance of minus 31% in May, the steepest fall on record, and extends a trend that has been in place since 2014. So that's telling you, for those of you that don't know, chartered surveyors are the guys that go out and inspect houses for generally the banks to give them assurance that the money that's being loaned out is going into a sound home, i.e. not something that's going to fall apart in a few weeks. So these guys obviously check out the foundations, they look at the structure for defects and that sort of thing, and then they report back to the bank with what they find. Now individual potential purchasers, they can then take out a separate chartered surveyor to inspect the home that they're proposing to buy for their own personal investment security. So if they're reporting a 45% fall, that means general inquiries at the stage of sale are falling 45%. Now, the market has also seen further decline in sales this month, successive monthly drop in activity. Contributors expect this trend to continue, with 26% more respondents anticipating a further drop in sales across the UK over the next 3 months. This is the most negative reading for near-term expectations since 1998. House price growth saw a reduction in June, and although prices are still rising, they are doing so at a more moderate pace, with 16% more respondents reported having seen prices rise rather than fall across the UK. London remains the only region where respondents are seeing prices fall, with a minus 46% net balance, but this is largely being concentrated in the central zones. That said, near-term price expectations are now in the negative territory across the whole of the UK, with 27% more respondents across the UK expecting to see prices fall rather than rise over the next 3 months, Rubinson pointed out. He also pointed out that looking further ahead over the next 12 months, sales expectations have turned negative for the first time in 4 years, with 12% more contributors expecting transactions to fall rather than rise. Significantly, over the next 12 months, the dip in prices is only expected to persist in London and East Anglia, with net balances of minus 39 and 34% respectively, and longer term, prices are still expected to rise, albeit a little less than previously anticipated, with a cumulative increase of 14% projected for the next 5 years. So they're still saying prices are still going to go up over the next 5 years. Yet all the data is pointing the other way. So figure that one out. So I'll just mark that, because with anything, property prices and instabilities in property prices, it always starts from the high-end markets. The turbulence comes from the high-end markets not moving and prices dropping in high-end markets. Like in the Webbot report about how this one guy in Australia will be sitting out on his porch looking out into the distance and seeing the high-end markets dropping out and falling drastically. And his comment to them, oh, you should have sold when it was high. And yet the same thing happens to him not too long after, and then he regrets it. That's effectively what Cliff High's Webbot was saying. Now, it's really quite easy to understand in the context of, if you throw a stone into a pond, you start off with a small ripple in the middle, and then that ripple moves outwards with more and more ripples. The London property market is that centre ripple. So anybody that's on the outskirts, whether it be east, west, south, north, it doesn't matter where you are, you're still going to get hit by that ripple. That's why they call it the ripple effect. Now it goes on to talk a bit more, but I'll leave it there. So I want to go over to this next section, which house prices were already falling before Brexit happened. In May, the average discount on the original asking price of a UK property was over £25,000, nearly £4,000 compared with January. So when they're coming out and telling you in the medias that Brexit has caused the property market to drop, well, the average asking price was 25 grand less before Brexit, and has been on a decline since January anyway. There's still obviously going to be exceptions where pockets are asking for more. Pockets as in certain areas that are affluent areas or high demand areas. Simply because obviously the ripple effect, it takes time for the market to realise what's going on. And it takes time for the buyers to understand the markets, because people only read about the trends and the increases and the higher and higher prices. They don't actually understand the fundamentals of economics and what's happening in the country. Of course, they know Brexit is happening and it has affected many, many things, but they don't spend the time to educate themselves into what the deep underlying factors will be for people. Anybody smart out there will be selling or will have already sold their homes. Now is the optimum time to sell because it's the peak. So if the average discount on a home is £25,000, you can expect to be able to snap up a very decent deal in the near future when buyers just drop out of the market for many, many reasons. Yet people still believe that property is going to increase. And to be honest, anything could actually happen, because prices can increase in the short term because governments can step in and start doing all the same tricks again, making things more attractive for buyers to help support and prop up this one market that has to come down. But the reason being, if the market comes down, there's going to be hell to pay, because the lost effect of wealth in the millions of people is going to be such a psychological hit, not to mention that the buying market will dry up furthermore, shunting the value of homes further down to more realistic prices that people can afford. But currently the opposite has happened. 2008, you can see the market starts to correct. It comes down to a lot more realistic prices, but what do? What does the government do? They just step in and they pump that market up with anything they can do. And all that does is devalue everything that you've got and gives the people that own the real estate properties the false sense of wealth creation. Now, it's only wealth creation if you sell out of it at the right time and get into something else. Because if you don't and you hang on to it and the thing deflates, what have you gained? You actually then quite likely hold a liability, because many people have mortgages, and we'll go on to cover that shortly. Rent in London has fallen after Brexit. According to some estate agents, more retail properties are joining the market as potential sellers decide to rent out their homes and wait out the Brexit uncertainty instead. When rent falls, house builders hang on to land. The first sign of this came when Barratt Developments said that it might rethink its house building and land buying plans because of Brexit uncertainty. Now, Barratt Developments are, I think, the biggest new house development companies in the UK, and they have huge amounts of land pre-acquired for generations. They buy land and effectively just lock it up until the market becomes correct for them to develop and sell. One of my other articles I read was saying that the UK requires 300,000 homes built every single year, but if developers stop developing, that just stems that small drip feed of homes added to the market each year, which is already nowhere near 300,000. Quote, "We had contingency plans in place and we have taken appropriate measures to reduce our risk, such as reassessing land approvals as we continue to monitor the market," end quote, David Thomas, Barratt Chief Executive, said. Now I'm going to go on to this last article, which is house prices. Are you at risk of falling into negative equity post-Brexit? Again, July the 15th. Drop of 10% would see 1 in 10 homeowners in the north of England owe more than their property is worth. Again, another guy walking past the estate agent window can't do anything but just stare. It's an obsession in the UK. Homeowners dread the phrase, quote, negative equity, end quote, but this could become a reality for many in the wake of the vote of Brexit last month. So I'll just stop there. Now you've got a lot of media coming out talking about interest rates, talking about housing markets losing value, and then all of a sudden you're hit with this word negative equity. Now, so many people for the past year or two have been buying property which is effectively, and this is just hypothetical, if the market does drop out, at that top of the market. Now, the worst time to obviously buy anything is at the top of the market. Hence why the word negative equity is now starting to become more front page. And this will obviously add to those who are educated enough to understand the reason why it might be a good idea just to sit on the fence and just watch what happens over the next couple of months without going into the property market with both feet. But this could become a reality for many in the wake of the vote of the Brexit last month. Experts expect prices to fall amid a wider economic slowdown, and ratings agency Moody's says there are a number of households which could be at risk if the price drop is steep. In particular, it points to the stark north-south divide, says The Guardian. A little less than 1 in 10 homeowners north of the Midlands would be in negative equity if house prices fell by 10%, rising to as much as 22% if the slide was 20%. Now, house prices are a lot lower in the north, as I described earlier, and this is telling us that a high number of people on the property ladder have huge mortgages. Now, I'm just going to throw a number out there. So say the average home in the north is 100,000 and people are taking out £90,000 mortgages with a £10,000 deposit. You only need that house to drop 10% in value to 90,000 before that person has no equity in that house, hence negative equity. Now, the situation becomes a lot more severe should it drop 20%, because then that guy or family or couple or whatever it is then actually has no equity in that property, and should they want to sell or get out or can't afford to pay, then they lose that home, but they also walk away from it with a debt burden over their heads. And that's only with a modest 20% drop. Now, there's a lot of mortgages out there that are actually 95% mortgage and 5% deposit, a lot of them being first-time buyers. With the recent, I believe it was in 2014 or 2015, that the government came out with a Help to Buy scheme to help prop up the first-time buyers so they can get in, because there was a huge fall in properties moving at the first-time buyer stage, which was affecting, obviously, the higher-tier properties, which obviously isn't good for high-net-worth individuals like, some politicians and bankers and people like that. So they want to stimulate their capital returns by piling on the debt to the younger generations to get into this housing market. Not to mention the, and I quote lightly, education from mainstream media and estate agent propaganda that property prices always go up. If they go down in the short term, they'll always go up. Look at the trends of history. Property prices always go up. So people have been brainwashed to believe property prices will always go up. If they drop a little bit, they'll recover. Don't worry about it, it's fine. Now, not to mention the drop in interest rates. So the bank have been slashing interest rates year after year after year. Interest is almost zero. It's getting close. It's 0.5 at the moment. And obviously Mark Carney came out just the other day saying that he's going to hold that bullet in the chamber for later on. And obviously I covered that in the other story. You can see that on my previous video. Here I'll carry on. Moody's analysts says house prices in Scotland, Wales and north of England all remain below their peak of 2007. In 15 to 22% of cases, the mortgage is more than 80% of the home value. In contrast, houses across the Midlands and especially in southern England have passed their pre-crash peak. A fall of 10 to 20% would mean between 0.03 and 3.5% of homeowners would fall into negative equity. Across the country, those who bought their home in the two bull markets of 2006 to 2008 and 2014 to 2015 are most at risk, with a 20% decline, putting 13 and 10% in deficit respectively. This compares to just 3% who bought their homes either before 2006 or between those two peaks. With banks in a much better position than in 2008, I just have to add there, what a load of bullshit, because that's total rubbish. So you're telling me Deutsche Bank is in a much more positive situation in 2008, huh? Sure. Way more debt loaded to all these banks through their derivative books. But anyway, let's carry on. Negative equity does not present an immediate problem if you can keep up with the repayments. However, it does make it more difficult to move home and leaves homeowners vulnerable if their incomes were to fall through. For example, unemployment. Are the drops outlined by Moody's likely? Most experts seem to suggest a dip in the housing market could be shallower than these figures as ongoing excess demand props up prices. KPMG believes prices could fall by around 5% across the UK by the end of the year, while the Treasury predicts prices would be flat to 8% lower by 2018. London is expected to see faster falls than the rest of the country. For comparison, the peak to trough fall during the financial crisis between 2008 and early 2009 was estimated at around 15% by the Office for National Statistics. Okay, so I just want to show you this chart here, which is the US House Price Index. And it's going to be a pretty similar index in the UK as well. And you can just tally this up to the countless numbers of currency creation and debt creation that we've seen, the exponential growth. And all that growth has just been slung into housing and stock markets. So that's the only reason the house markets have gone up to the extent that they have. Now, flipping back over to here, which is quite an interesting chart, which unfortunately doesn't go to today, but to give you an indication, this is the Barratt Home Developments chart from 1991 to 2009. And the red line is representing the spikes that they're developing and building new homes on the land that they've acquired previously. Now, what gets really interesting is they generally build homes prior to a spike. So in 1994 through to 1999, they were building a lot of new homes prior to the market valuations increasing in the value of homes. So at this crossover section here, that's when the market price started to outperform Barratt Homes. So basically, if they were building these homes and they were built and ready for sale at this intersection, they would have then make a lot of money through the sale period into here. And again, you can see this peak up here, which is in 2006, 2007. That's when they get all their building done and finished and sold. And that's something I can't actually tell off this chart, to be honest, is if this is developments completed or if this is development started. It just says Barratt Developments. But I'm guessing it's built and sold when you see the chart. or built and sold off plan and sold a little bit further. Obviously, a year down the line, they still have a few homes for sale and things like that. Anyway, the point of this chart is showing you that in 2007, when clearly Barratt was aware of market instabilities, they shut off all construction for the next year. At precisely the right time, the market fell out in 2008 and then started to retrace, obviously with the quantitative easing that was put in through the markets and the banks and the help to buy funds and all that sort of thing. And then obviously it starts to increase again because they've got confidence that the banks and governments are starting to prop it up. But this is a perfect indication. So when Barratt Homes stops construction, you can guarantee the market's going to be dropping out. Now, I'm pretty sure they're connected to the people they need to be connected to find out the real agendas of what exactly is going on behind the scenes. So that's that chart. We've then got the house price chart here, which is showing the average growth per year. Now, as we know, the 2000s through to the 2005 period was its peak, and year-on-year growth actually hit 25%, which is huge, especially when you're talking about £200,000 homes. You're making 50 grand a year just on the increased value of your home, buying it from the previous year. And that's the time, and all these TV shows were coming on where property development became a huge reality TV show, basically. And that also added to people's belief that they can just buy a property, do a bit of work to it, sell it the next year, and they will have made a huge amount of money. Whereas in reality, you would have made a huge amount of money even if you didn't do anything to that property. But people were not aware of that. They were thinking what they were doing to the property was adding value to the property. It was just the market value of the property that was rising, regardless of the work that was taking place inside. Now, what is really interesting is you see the crash in 2008. Now, bear in mind that it's a bearish flag formation. And again, I go back to the ripple effect, because whenever there is a shock to the market, or there's a shock to the housing market, the financial market, whatever market it is, it takes time for it to go through the markets. It takes time to get to the average Joe in the street who is either buying and selling. And that's the market realization. It can take a year or two before it fully filters through. So anyway, the market crash in 2008 saw the prices go from a gain of 10% per year, between 5 and 10% a year, after this huge peak here, don't forget. And there was no market instability at this time. Just the house prices got so unattainable, nobody could actually get into it. So that reduced the purchases year on year on year, because it just got to silly money and wages weren't even in the same realm as what these valuations were. Now, the crash that happened actually took, on average, probably about 17% of the valuation from here off it. And as we all know, they then slapped loads of money back into the markets to prop it up, because they had to continue this false reality that we live in. Now, this was just a tiny, modest correction, which in the scheme of things is nothing, and I will show you on this next chart what I'm talking about. Right, so sorry about the blur on here, it's just a really terrible picture from the file. Anyway, this will be the 2008 period here, and that's the correction that we're talking about. That's the 17% correction from those all-time highs. Now, we have had a gain. This is from 1980 down here, and obviously this is 2008, so this is probably about the year 2000 here. There was that huge gain. So would you call that a fair correction in the market? Because I don't. That is just an artificial recorrection to keep the system propped up, and it's actually showing that it's obviously increasing a little bit as well. Now, this market, whether it be this year, next year, is inevitable to drop down to at least a 50% correction, in my belief. At least a 50% correction. So if the average property is now 215,000, I'm expecting it to at least come down to about 107,000. Now, that's the thing that people won't believe. That's the thing that people can't get into their psyche, is market cycles. They just believe that property just continues to rise regardless of anything. And it only continues to rise while it's got the backing of governments and officials to prop it up. We're now facing the era of negative interest rates. spreading across this globe, especially obviously in Europe. And, this actually is a serious time to think carefully about where you have your wealth, because in my opinion, property is the worst place now to have your wealth. And this chart here, which comes from the Martin Armstrong website, is probably representative of the American market, but to be honest, I kind of class it all as one, because we're all in the same banking system, and what happens in one area will affect the other. It's just how long that ripple effect takes to work its way out through the pond. Now, interesting enough, it's predicting we are at the peak in 2015 in October. Now, we're only plus minus 6 months past that, but it's predicting that by 2016, at the end of October stroke November, which is also round about the US election times, markets will be at their bottom for that period. And obviously, with the talk in the previous articles about a 3-month drop and decline in pretty much everything property related in the UK, that is only going to have one impact on the valuations of property, because there'll be less people going for those properties. Now, if we take into account, obviously, banking crises and, Deutsche Bank exploding, or whatever might be the situation, wars, whatever, it all has the same impact on mentality of property, because people become more careful with buying. But what it's telling us is we're going to have a huge correction in this market in that period. We're going to have a huge correction between October 2015 to October 2016. So you can effectively write off all of 2016, which is what we're in now. So we're obviously at the peak, but a lot of people are predicting that it's going to go down. Now, obviously, we can't predict exactly how far that's going to go down, because there's going to be a rebound. And that rebound, I believe, is going to be purely financial help from the banks and the governments to give the false belief that the markets are fine. We will introduce lower rates so the mortgages are cheaper. We will increase liquidity into the market so people can take out these great loans at very affordable prices. We will stimulate businesses. We will do all these things to make debt flow more freely through the markets, because that's all that this market is. It's a debt cycle system. And the only thing that is keeping it going is throwing more debt into the system to keep it going. Whenever has debt been the answer to a debt crisis, to a debt problem? You can't pay debt off with more debt. And this is what people don't understand. And this is what people that believe property prices are just going to continue going up, is they don't understand debt. They don't see that it's an unsustainable system. Now anyway, there's going to be a small correction, but that's only going to be short-lived, because it's just going to fail and not work. And for the next 2 years, the markets are just going to crash. So what we're estimating to see is between now, 2016, and 2020, the prices should fall, I believe, 50%. So anybody who is now buying in this range through here, and this range through here, you're going to find yourself falling into negative equity. And the stress and burden that's going to be put on your life is going to actually be detrimental to thousands and hundreds of thousands of people's lives. Now, I'm speaking about this firsthand because my brother is actually in the process of selling his house and buy a house down here in the south. And I've tried to tell him that this is a really stupid idea for the following reasons. But unfortunately, he doesn't understand it and just sees it as, well, he needs a house to live. And he's being pressured by his girlfriend, and he has a young child. So there's other impacts that he has to take care of, i.e. looking after his family. However, I've said to him, you want to just sell your house and you want to rent. You want to just rent, because if you rent for 6 months to a year, it's going to cost you maybe £10,000 on rent. But the money that you're going to save could be £30,000 or £40,000. Now, granted, if this market collapses underneath him, he won't be able to purchase a house further down the line, because liquidity will be frozen. Banks won't be loaning out money because the market will be falling and falling and falling. Now, I'm quite worried about a lot of people in the last, effectively 2 years, that have been buying in this area here, and there's been that huge push on first-time buyers and 95% mortgages, and all that debt that has been associated to their name has the potential, should this market fall out, to totally destroy their life for I don't even want to think about how long. The impact of taking out a £200,000 mortgage with a 5% equity stake deposit, paying it back on a mortgage interest of 4%, all that gets catapulted upside down when the house price market drops out, the interest rate rises, and these people effectively get squeezed out of their home. So they're put into a position where you have to work even harder to just tread water. And this could take an even more severe turn. There's another article I read. It's not so much an article, it's more a prediction for the future. And it's predicting that houses in the UK by 2020 will be mostly rented, not owned. And I was trying to understand why that would happen, because on a slight sidetrack, before I go down that road, I forgot to mention, there's a lot of people from London who are buying multiple homes in the southeast for either rental or second homes and things, or third homes, things like that. And that adds an extra squeeze onto the availability of homes for people that actually want to live in those areas with families, etc., which then pushes up prices. Now, these people have high wages in comparison. They might be on, 6-digit salaries, and they're able to take out large home loans based upon the salary they're earning. But with the large home loan comes the potential for an even larger negative equity stake. But if you're taking out a string of properties, which lots of people are doing, then they can find themselves in a huge amount of debt very quickly. And their natural reaction is going to be limit the liability, which is just fire sell those houses, flats, back into the market so they can get out of that debt trap that they've put themselves into through this false market. And it's all about putting debt onto people. Now, if you collapse a market with huge amounts of debt, who wins? It's the banks. Now, going back to the other story about the prediction of most homes will be rented, I'm kind of on the thought pattern at the moment that should a huge systemic collapse occur in the banking systems or in the housing markets, it affects everything. It affects your job, it affects your mortgage repayments, it affects the housing markets. So if everything corrects and declines, and people are slumped into negative equity and they're losing their jobs left, right and centre, and house prices are just falling and nobody wants to buy them, so people are slashing the prices just to get out of that negative equity, you can imagine the situation that happens. Now people end up just walking out and declaring bankruptcy. That's what happens. So these homes that were once worth an average of 200,000 are now at that 50% line because nobody wants them. Nobody's got the money. No banks are lending money. The only people who can buy houses in a huge decline are cash buyers. And the cash buyers are going to be very few and far between. So you will just have a downward falling spiral of the property prices. Now what happens to the properties? So if people can't afford to pay, people get repossessed, homes get taken over, people are kicked out onto the streets. You may think that sounds a bit extreme, but if you think about it in terms of these banks have created money out of thin air, out of nothing, and they are the legal owners of thousands and hundreds of thousands of homes across the UK and across the world. What better way to grab as much property as they can in a market crash, which could be the agenda all along, to give the artificial effect that people are creating wealth by inflating house prices, only to give them the false sense of greed for wanting more and more and more, which is what today's society is. Today's society is all about greed. For them to suddenly pull the rug from underneath your feet, collapsing the system and taking all those properties back. But not only taking all those properties back, but leaving people with huge amounts of debt over their head for the rest of their lives, with no real possible employment to pay off that debt. the psychological effect on these people, they're going to want to commit suicide. They're going to feel like failures. There's going to be riots. You can't even paint the picture for this. But what happens to the properties? Because the bank just has a liability, right? Wrong. Because if people can't afford to buy these houses, what do? Well, the bank has no option but to rent them. So the bank becomes the UK landlord for a very high percentage of homes. The people then become trapped in a rental situation because you then have to get any form of work to live in a home to pay the rent to the bank or the government, or however it's issued out. It will probably be a government issue. The bank will lease out these homes to the government, and the government will put people into contracts of, back to basically where it was before Margaret Thatcher, and you can research that. So this looks to me like an extremely unethical growth of debt, all in order to entrap and enslave people. A lot of people are going to make a huge amount of money out of this collapse that's going to be coming. But unfortunately, there's going to be even more people that just lose everything and don't understand how this happened, because they're blinded by greed and growth, which is an unsustainable cycle. Life is a cycle. Things go up, things come down. The people don't believe the market's going to come down. There's people still going out buying houses today, when if they had any education in markets, they'd be doing anything but that. And this is my warning to the UK people, to my subscribers, to try and spread this message to anybody that will listen, because you have to educate yourself to debt, you have to educate yourself to cycles, and you have to educate yourself to greedy banking corporations' greed to entrap and enslave humanity into poverty. Elite class people do not want its citizens to have freedom of movement, to have freedom and choice. And in my belief, they're going to find out the hard way. People just don't understand anything other than learning life the hard way. I'm thankful to all the people out there that have raised my awareness of what is going on in the world. And from me learning from them, I've then learned this myself. And I'm now wanting, obviously, to share the limited knowledge that I have with anybody that wants to listen. And it's come to a time, I believe, where people need to stop being selfish and start thinking about other people. Because in a system and society that has everything taken from it, the only thing we're going to have is each other. The governments aren't going to be supporting us. It's going to be our fellow man, and we need to have compassion for our fellow man. It's hard for me to walk past people in the street, or see my neighbours, or interact with people when I know their root drive is a selfish me mentality. But the only reason they have that mentality is because that is the indoctrinated brainwashing agenda that has been distilled upon them for generations. And we're only talking about, obviously, housing markets and the financial association with that. I'm not even taking into account the dividing of people, how governments control us, and I've slightly touched on that in previous video, which I did label as Pokemon and Black Lives Matter. However, I put out a pre-video to that saying urgent update, briefing my subscribers that this video that I'm about to put out has nothing to do with the topic. It's merely to encourage people that might be interested in those topics, like Pokemon or Black Lives Matter, to watch this video because of the title. However, as I explained, videos on YouTube only get watched when they have a decent amount of watch time and positive views. They don't get ranked high in a system if they're not watched. And this video that I put out was all about raising people's awareness to the world that we live in. So I really would appreciate it if you would go back and view the video that I've got listed as Pokemon and how to get hot chicks. And then the same video is also labelled as Black Lives. Both are the same video, but inside is a very significant message that I hope will just help some people start to question and slowly wake out of this brain dead zombie slump that they're in. Because the more people that wake up, the more chance we have of doing something about controlling what is happening, and less people will become affected by this event that is not too far in front of our futures. Thanks a lot for watching.